Your very first job before you became a world champion mixed martial arts, you were a school teacher.
Would I go back to teaching high school? Not possible. I don't think I could get through a day of school without smacking a student at this point in time. Especially some of the stuff that I see on social media. I'm just like, oh Lord, thank you for me not having to teach anymore.
What was it like fighting Anderson Silva in his prime?
I was doing really well. I think I was winning the first round until he caught me. Fighting someone like Anderson is difficult, but when you walk out in the second round of a match and you're fighting two of him, because that's what you see, it's even more problematic. Remember the time that you and I were training and it was the end of my day and Matt put you in my guard?
Yep.
Do you remember this?
Yep.
Oh God. And I was like, and I was telling the story, I was like, he wouldn't quit moving. Like I was trying to grab a hold of him. I was like, it was literally like a spider monkey that took like a bunch of cocaine and drank Mountain Dew after Mountain Dew after Mountain Dew, and it just wouldn't stop.
Oh, it's 15-time world champion Demetrious Johnson. You're listening to the MightyCast.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the MightyCast, and we are joined by Rich Ace Franklin, a good friend of mine. We've trained together for many, many years ago. He was there when I was an amateur. Rich, welcome to the show. How you doing, brother?
It's good to be here, man. I'm doing great. It's gray here in Cincinnati today, but nonetheless, it's a beautiful day. So I can't ask for much better than that. Lord's blessed me with a good day.
Nice. Are you based in Cincinnati now? Are you back home full time?
Yeah. I working for this company. I've been with the company going on 12 years. This is the longest I've been in any one position in my life. Actually, this is longer than I competed with the UFC. So initially I was working for the company. I was commuting from here to Singapore or anywhere in Southeast Asia that I was needed, or anywhere in Asia for that matter that I was needed. Then I moved down to Singapore for 5 years, and I've been back for the last couple of years and working on the U.S. expansion here. A lot of work with the commissions, things on that side. Obviously, you've sat in the commentary booth with us as well, so I do a bit of commentary work. And then I'm kind of like a mortar for this company, where you build a brick wall and that mortar that fills in the gaps. I'm just kind of told where to go and what to do.
You're all like, oh, I got it. Where would you fit in?
I thought I was voguing or something again, a little Madonna video. No, I'm just like, it's just like, if they're like, hey, we need you to do this thing, I'm like, all right, got it.
I love it.
On top of my two main responsibilities, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about the business side of what you're doing now, but let's go to the very beginning, because your very first job before you became, a world champion mixed martial arts, you were a school teacher. Correct, right? You were a math teacher, correct?
Yeah, I was.
So what, as I, my journey to mixed martial arts was a lot different than yours, right? I went to college, dropped out. Well, I don't want to say dropped out, but I stopped going because my grades started. I guess you could say drop out. But I wanted to pursue.
Hold on, what's the difference between dropping out and just stopping going?
I don't know. I feel since you've been a teacher, you've had students, probably drop out, get A's, whatever. You can answer that question for me.
I honestly, I don't know. If you quit going, that's pretty much. I guess if you didn't properly fill out your drop slips for each of the classes, then you technically didn't drop out. But at some point in time, you're out of the university. I'm not a big university fan, by the way, man. Like I think most degrees that you get are an extreme waste of time, and that's coming from an educator.
Wow. You heard it there, ladies and gentlemen. Going to college is a waste of time. You hear it from a school teacher. So, rethink your life. You're in college right now. And, I'm going to shot my drink. Rethink your life. And I don't know. Now that you put it that way, I just stopped going, right? Like I had to work full time. I come from a poor background. So in order for me to be able to drive, have, car insurance, I needed to work full time. So 40 hours a week on top of a full load of classes, 15 credits. It just wasn't sustainable. And so I was like, I'm going to stop going to college. I'm going to focus on working. I'm going to focus on training in mixed martial arts. Obviously, the amateur fights led me to being a professional athlete. But for you, it was a little bit different. You were a successful school teacher. Tell me what made you get into mixed martial arts.
I grew up playing sports my whole life, right? I was football was my first love, and I just wasn't. God did not design me for that sport. I don't have the explosiveness or the top end speed that you need to have quick feet, but that came handy in MMA. And when I started training in martial arts, when I was a young kid, my dad put me in karate. I was like 9, 10. I trained for 2 or 3 years, and then I got involved in sports growing up, just whatever, played baseball a couple years, played football, played basketball, and I gravitated towards football. I really liked that sport. But as I grew from my junior high or my elementary body to my junior high and high school body, I kept growing vertically and I wasn't growing horizontally. So my senior year when I graduated, I was only 155 pounds, soaking wet, clothed. And so there were no colleges knocking on my door for sure. But towards the end of my junior year, I got back into karate. And at this time, there still wasn't anything such as mixed martial arts. It didn't exist. And so I was just training just because I thought, well, if I ever get into a fight, I want to be able to defend myself. But once I saw the first UFC at that time in 93, I was like a bit by the bug. Wow, this is something that would be really cool. So it went from training karate. My instructor's son had been in the Marine Corps. He had done some training in Thailand, did a little bit of Muay Thai. That was my introduction to Muay Thai at that time. There was a Gracie school in Cincinnati where the head instructor was a blue belt, which was a huge deal in 1995, man. Like huge deal to have a blue belt. And so that was the first instructor that I started taking jiu-jitsu lessons from. And really for me, all I was interested in is learning how to fight in case I ever got into a fight on the street. And after watching the first couple mixed martial arts events, I thought, man, if you get into a fight, there's a good chance this will end up on the ground. So I better be able to. So I just kind of developed this idea of being well-rounded. All the meanwhile, I was going to university because my dad put a high importance on education. He barely graduated from high school. He didn't drop out or he didn't quit going or however you define these things. Mm-hmm. But he barely made it through. And so he ended up going back to university later in life. Basically earned his bachelor's degree the same year that I did when I graduated university. And so getting my education was a big deal to him. And fortunately, I was a good combination between poor and smart. And so people were willing to give those kids things like grants and scholarships. And so I applied for a ton of scholarships. Otherwise, like you, I wouldn't have been able to afford to go to university either. But by the time I was done, I was in a 5-year program. And that 5th year was the year I took my first amateur fight just on a dare from one of my friends. But I'm one of those people that when I start doing something like you, I'm going to zero in on that thing and become as good at it as I could possibly become. And so fortunately, I was just really good at this sport. I had a good learning curve and I took off, unlike any other sport I ever played.
Nah, but you were a full-time school teacher before you made that transition, right? Because
I took my first amateur fight the year I graduated from university. So I was in a 5-year program. So I ended up with 2 bachelor's degrees. So I had graduated in 97, then again in 98. And it was that July of 98 when I took my first amateur fight. And then I fought about half a dozen amateur fights. And this was at a time where athletic commissions, they existed, but they didn't know how to deal with MMA. And so mixed martial arts are often referred to as NHB at the time. If you remember, it was called No Holds Barred for a while. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember that term.
Yep.
And it really was just like the wild, wild west of like being able to intertwine into these athletic commissions. I fought in an amateur show, for example, where the promoter that was putting on the show had a PhD in philosophy, and that actually qualified him as the doctor. And so, yeah. The story gets better. I end up kicking this guy in the jaw, and I broke his jaw in 3 places. Damn. He was unconscious. I don't know how long he was unconscious, for a half hour or something, but they didn't have medical staff on site because the commissions just didn't exist then, right? To create these kind of rules. So, I fought in these times where this wild, wild west, obviously things like that are dangerous, but there's some cool stories. I'm fighting in places where I've had like chickens walking through my locker room at a state fair, or the cage breaks in the middle of the fight and it has to get repaired type of thing. So all these kinds of things happen. And I love being part of that part of history of this industry, man. But yeah, I took my first amateur fight that year that I graduated. And then I started fighting basically towards the end of my first year of teaching. I had my first professional fight, and then that lasted until I quit teaching full-time in 2002, and then continued teaching in an at-risk program part-time a couple nights a week because you know how it is when you first quit, like you're not making money as a fighter. And so you got to keep the electricity on somehow. And so I was still working in an at-risk program for students that were on the verge of expulsion. It was an off-campus facility, and I was doing that 2 or 3 days a week to earn some extra money. And that kind of supplemented the, $2,000 I got paid here for a fight and the $2,000 I got paid there for a fight to kind of keep things going on.
What's going on, guys? This episode of the MightyCast is sponsored by DoorDash. Now, DoorDash is an amazing app that can deliver food directly to your front doorstep. Not just food, but also groceries. Now, if you're too lazy like myself after I get done training at the gym, doing 10 to 12 rounds, the last thing I'm thinking about is cooking in the damn kitchen. What I like to do is click on that DoorDash app, go to my favorite restaurant, and have them deliver that food directly to my front doorstep. And you can do that too. All you gotta do is download the app in your store, DoorDash. Use my promo code MIGHTY2024. That'll help you save up to 50% on your first order, up to $10 or $15 or more. Now, ladies and gentlemen, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. That'll also help you get that amazing promotion going on right now. Shout out to DoorDash for sponsoring this episode of the MightyCast. Now, let us get back to our guest. And what age were you when you first started? Because you graduated from college, which you're after your 5-year program, and you're working full time as a math teacher, correct? What age were you? Because a lot of people, you look at today's society, and obviously you have ONE Championship, you have UFC, PFL belts, you have all these things. So you have, like my son who's 11, he's been doing jiu-jitsu for 2 years. He has no goals to be world champion in mixed martial arts. But I feel now you have so many organizations where you see kids, they're 8 years old, and they're like, I want to be MMA champion. And they start training now at 8 years old, to where you kind of started later in life, like I did, because there was no mixed martial arts on TV, especially when you were going, right? So what age, because everybody says, is it too late to start training mixed martial arts to be a world champion? What age was it when you started? Like, okay, I think my first amateur fight, you done karate, you did all the sports in high school, but what was that age? Because that's the one thing I get asked all the time.
I would say, I started training when I was 17 again, but that was just a traditional karate. And then I probably started really kind of mixing other things in, like right when I was like 18, like just after I graduated. Mm-hmm. And I took this like idea of this is what needs to be done. And if you remember, the first UFC wasn't mixed martial arts. It was pitted as jiu-jitsu versus boxing or karate versus wrestling or whatever. And so it still didn't even exist then. But the idea of this, there are no holds barred fighting. There's no rules. There were a couple rules at the time. And this is before any kind of sanctioning or regulation got into this. But the initial rules in the UFC were pretty much, there were few, like no eye gouging, no grabbing the throat, no, you could even strike in the groin. Like, remember? You see these things happen. Yeah, you can see like fighters' hairs getting grabbed. When Guy Metzger had long hair, I remember that fight, and his opponent like reached into his hair and pretty much was controlling his head that way. And then the next time Guy Metzger fought, he had hair like it was this length instead. So all those things that existed, and so really, if you want to say like when did you actually start MMA, I was probably at that time seeing Ken Shamrock in the first few events. I really looked up to him. He looked like a gladiator, but he was one of the few fighters at the time that truly was like, he was a shoot wrestler, but he was mixed. Like he would stand and he would go to the ground and grapple. Like he was known to have some good submissions, as well as he would stand there and throw some punches. So in that early batch of fighters, he was the one that I would say was like Gen 1 of, or pre-Gen 1 MMA. And then it was when my group of fighters, like my generation of fighters, were the first true generation of mixed martial artists, the Matt Hugheses and myself and the Chuck Liddells. And this is where we really started blending things together. When you fast forward now, some people, many of the listeners will probably forget the history of all this or wouldn't even know it, but now this sport's been around since they were kids. And so they don't understand what it was like for us to not have this around, or for me particularly. And I know you've worked out, like you done most of your training at AMC, but you also kind of go to different places to get things done. But before I had gone up to AMC in Seattle, I'm here in Cincinnati, and I had a boxing coach on one side of town and a kickboxing coach on the other side of town and a jiu-jitsu coach. And then my guys would get together and kind of piece things together. And so I am a believer that it is very beneficial to work individual arts by themselves. Like, not everything needs to be mixed together just so you can fine tune particular techniques. But yeah, I spend a lot of time doing boxing at this gym over here and doing kickboxing at this gym over here, and then kind of coming together with the meeting of the minds. And that was how the original generation of MMA fighters trained, really.
Yeah. Well, you hit on it too. Like, I felt like your era of mixed martial arts was one of the golden eras, right? Because it was you, Matt Hughes, GSP was on the scene. You had Tim Silva, you had Chuck Liddell, you had Randy Couture. And I will never forget this. I felt when you guys first burst on the scene, it was, you guys weren't labeled as UFC fighters, right? If I saw, I see you walking down the street, be like, oh shit, that's the guy who looks like, Jim Carrey, Ace, Rich Franklin, there's Matt Hughes, there's Short Pierre. I felt like you guys were part of this golden era because the sport, Forrest Griffin was there. What's the gentleman's name? He just passed away not too long ago. Forrest Griffin and,
Stephan
Bonner. I apologize for forgetting his name. Stephan Bonner. I felt like you guys were the golden era because you guys weren't labeled as UFC fighters, right? You guys were labeled as, athletes. You guys fight in the cage, Valetudos. You guys weren't labeled. But now you see a UFC, you see a guy like, I don't fucking know. Like not Cheeto Vera, because Cheeto Vera has a personality, but you guys had your guys' brand and personality was bigger than the organization. Right?
Well, they needed it. They needed it to be so, right? I mean, if you go back and look at a lot of the marketing that they did at that time, they needed a clean cut boy next door, high school teacher. Hey, this guy's college educated. They used to talk about Chuck Liddell having his accounting degree. I can remember hearing that. Matt Hughes was this farmer that Tim Silva was this kind of the way he was marketed as this big clumsy guy that overcame all odds. And I've trained with Tim a lot, and it's truly impressive what he was able to do. Randy Couture was the military guy that was, and they needed it because the sport itself had such a negative connotation attached to it that they needed clean-cut people. And so I was relied on a lot to be like that go-to guy that they could call for an interview that would, hey, you can present this in a good light. MMA was being talked about as being very dangerous at that time, and they were moving towards regulation. And when I first joined the UFC, for that matter, they didn't even have all the weight classes that they had. There was no middleweight class when I was first in the organization, so I actually entered the organization as a light heavyweight.
What?
A small light heavyweight. Yeah, a small light heavyweight, but because keep in mind, my first fight was against Evan Tanner, who was 8-1 in the UFC at the time. Man, they threw me to the Sharks right away, and his only loss was to Tito Ortiz, and I believe it was for the title. But then he was actually crowned the first middleweight champ ever, and I took the belt from him in UFC 53. I took the belt from him. But that they had created the middleweight class because they realized there's just too much of a discrepancy between these bigger guys and smaller guys. And so I was fighting at 205, but I weighed maybe 215 at the time. I was never a big 205er.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, well, getting my body weight down and making 185 shouldn't be that difficult. I'd never cut weight in my life. I never wrestled growing up here. That's one sport I never did, which I should have done. But never did that. So I had no experience cutting weight the first couple times I cut weight. I can remember cutting weight, and I did my first attempt, and I went from 209, and I only made it to 189. And then the second time I made it to 188. And I did 2 practice trials. And I remember hearing an interview that Monty, my manager, did. And he was like, yeah, Franklin's done several weight cuts. He's easy, no problem at all. And because my first fight at 185 was Jorge Rivera. Man, was I so nervous for that, because cutting weight is an event within itself, especially if you're, but we honed in on that, and I had that thing mastered between nutrition and water intake and overhydration prior to the weight and all that there was so many tricks that you could do. So I'm actually glad, kind of circling back to one that we don't, for the athletes like that we don't actually have, the athletes don't have to do those things, because I can remember sitting in saunas for hours on end. I sat in a sauna over 2 hours at the MGM for my Nate Corey fight because I did not know, and I forgot my scale at home. Made that mistake one time and only one time in my career, but their scale in the MGM was broken, and I sat in that sauna over 2 hours.
Damn.
And made weight. And I was actually, when I left the locker room, I was still a half pound over, and I was like, Lord, like, please let me float this half pound. And I looked at my team, I was like, guys, I'm dry. I have nothing left. And then I weighed in at 183 for that fight. I overcut 2 pounds, unbeknownst to me. Like 2 pounds
that's a lot. That is a lot.
Yeah. I mean, listen, like 200 grams is a lot. 2 ounces is a lot to overcut when you're that dry. So to 2 pounds, like, I can't even imagine how bad that was for my body. But nonetheless, like, not making weight wasn't an option for me. But that's probably the first time where mentally I was just like, I'm out of juice. I got nothing left in me to cut. So
damn,
yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Little days, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy when you talk about, because like you said, a lot of the listeners, in mixed martial arts today don't know about the infancy stages of when you're talking about there was no commission. It was, no hold bars, like anything goes. You had it when it was like, what's the best art form? Is it karate? Is it boxing? Is it jujitsu? And then you fast forward to when you talk about, when it came to marketing, you were the nice guy. Oh, here's this guy. He's a badass, but he's also a teacher. You have Renegade Tory. He's a military guy. You have Tim Silva, defies all odd. Yeah. Chuck Liddell, kind of, an accountant, had a mohawk. You had Tito Ortiz, the bad boy. Like, you had all this. Where now you fast forward, you got, you have the Conor McGregor who's like, I don't give a fuck what any of you guys are going to do. It's just a complete dynamic change. You have Alex Piejeda. You have Rodtang. Rodtang, very well-spoken, very kind, eats so many shots. It's just crazy to see the complete, change of advertisement. And where now I feel it's more about the brand than the athletes, because I'll never forget, our good friend Brad Kurtzen, he said that when you guys were fighting, you guys were bigger than the sport. Now, no organization will allow an athlete become bigger than the sport itself or the organization, where you, nine out of times, you see some guys who kind of grow bigger, right? Like you see, Rodtang walking down the street. You don't say, oh, that's a ONE Championship fighter. You're like, oh, that's Rodtang, but he's the Muay Thai. Well, he ain't anymore because he fucking missed weight. But he was the world champion in flyweight in ONE Championship. Or you see Alex Piejeda. Oh, that's Alex Piejeda. Potan Chama. He is the light heavyweight champion of the UFC, right? So I always love sitting back and hearing somebody talk about that who I kind of watch grow up into mixed martial arts. And today everybody's like, oh, that's a UFC fighter. Oh, that's ONE Championship fighter. Oh, they don't recognize them as their own separate entity. They associate him as that person of that organization.
You see this I think you kind of see this across the board in sports. For example, you look at like the NFL. Yeah. No, there's not one athlete that's bigger than the NFL. You can take some of the greatest of all time, like a Tom Brady. I mean, yeah, the NFL is going to depend on Tom Brady. He's a clean-cut guy. Yep. Never, aside from like the Deflategate, there was not a whole lot of controversy surrounding him during his career. Yeah, and he never got in any kind of trouble. He was never like punching anybody out in security. I don't think he would be able to. But there was no rumors of him like sleeping around with a bunch of women. He was just like really clean-cut. And his story was all the championships that he won. Yep. And it's big. And I'm sure the NFL depends on him for the ratings that they need. Obviously, the Patriots, like during that dynasty, they're going to be placed on Monday Night Football probably more often than any other team, or a Thursday Night Football more often than any other team, because they bring in the ratings. Yep. And that largely lies on a player like him or any other player that they can market. But at the end of the day, once he retires, that league keeps going. It's a machine that and so it's like, well, let's move it on. Who's next? Oh, Patrick Mahomes. He's the next golden child, right? Yep. And so they're going to hype him, and they're going to get several championships, and I could go on for days about how I'm not 100% certain the rig's not fixed anymore. And but like it's
you sound like a producer. Michael's like watching stuff, and he goes, God, I swear the NFL's rigged when we're doing price picks. And I'm like, you really think so? And he goes, oh God, yeah, I think they pull people off their field just on purpose so they don't get their goals, or there are things I've been told that I've heard stories that if this person makes, a certain amount of yards, they're going to get their bonus. And they're like, we're going to keep him off so he doesn't get that bonus, which is kind of crazy. It's like, why put that bonus in place for me to work towards and strive for? And then when I almost get close to it, they're like, put that man on ice. We can't have him.
In order to fix a game, it only takes one bad call or one player to not throw the ball the right way, or to have a bad day or whatever, to drop the ball once or twice, or lob up that pass for an interception. Like it only takes one weak link for one person to be compromised. So the whole game, like that can affect the other 11 players on the team. I don't know if those things happen, but I'm a realist. Like, it's not beyond the realm of possibility, so to speak, to say that never happens, really. Like you'd bet the ranch on that if you're willing to say like that stuff never happens. Like, come on.
Oh, man, I'm getting us back on track. We're all over the fucking place, Rich. Okay, now you became a world champion, right? You started, you won the belt at 205, but then they made a division of 185. I'll never forget when you fought Nate Marquardt, right? You hit him with that beautiful, you're southpaw.
Corey.
Oh, Nate Corey. My apologies. Nate Corey. Nate Marquardt. Yeah, that's another fighter. He fights, Dude. Nate Corey.
He and I were kind of somewhat on a collision course, but never fought each other. He's definitely an underrated fighter for his day. He was really well-rounded for his day, for sure.
Yes.
He didn't get the accolades that he deserves. And he's a solid dude too. I don't know Nate personally. I may have met him once or twice, like in passing, but I don't know in person. But seeing some of the content he puts out, he seems like a good guy.
Yeah, I never forget. When Nate Marquardt, when he knocked out Tyron Woodley in Strikeforce, beautiful not overhand right, but it was a beautiful right elbow, left hook, and a beautiful uppercut, and dropped Tyron Woodley. So absolutely sent that guy. But you knocked out Nate Corey, my apologies, with a beautiful left hook, right? Let's talk about your time as a UFC champion. Like, what was that like? Because I felt like you said, clean-cut guy, come from a background of education, essentially. You become a world champion. How does life change? Because I never forget you made that comment when you were up here in Seattle. You're like, man, when you get into mixed martial arts, you're going to have all these hot chicks like, oh, Rich, we love you, Rich, we love you. But it's totally opposite. You have all these dudes, oh man, Rich, you're badass, man. You're like, man, I thought it was going to be a whole bunch of chicks, not dudes. Tell me about your life as a champion in the infancy stage of the UFC when it wasn't big at that time.
Well, I'll tell you what. When I won my title, so what was on the line for me winning the title against Evan Tanner, was the second time that I fought him, was that whoever won that fight was going to be coach of the second season of The Ultimate Fighter, which was probably one like the season that really put the UFC on the map at the time. Like, the first season opened things up, but I think that second season was really viewed because that finale, the finale for the first one was when I fought Ken Shamrock, and that was the big. People forget that I was the main event of that fight because the Forrest Griffin Stephan Bonner fight was so good. It was so good that they forget that was the finale, but it set into that second season. And I can remember that, MMA wasn't mainstream at that time.
Yep.
And I can remember after I won that fight, we were in Atlantic City. I fought at Trump Plaza, and when we got on the plane the next day, because I was flying directly from there to Vegas because I had to start the filming that Sunday or Monday. I was going right into the filming of the second season of The Ultimate Fighter as the coach. And I just remember when we get on the plane, Dana looked at me and said, "You ready to be a star?" And I was like, yeah, whatever. Like, this sport is not very mainstream. And I never thought the ceiling would ever be that high. Truly, I never did. I'll say this. What changed for me was, in one aspect, nothing changed. I remember the night that I won my belt, walking back to my hotel room. This was at a time when you could still leave the arena and not need to be escorted by security. Mm-hmm. Like, you'd sign a few autographs here and there, and people like, "Hey, good fight, champ," type thing. But I went back to my hotel room and I put my bed down, my belt down on the bed. And I was there with some of my team. My wife was there, and I remember just looking at the belt, and there was like 4 of us in there, and I said, like, I don't feel like a champion. I'm the same guy I was 3 hours ago, basically. And I don't know if I was expecting like these big parades through New York City with confetti, like you see when the soldiers came back from World War II, or what, but it was just kind of a lot of the same. But then as time went on, then the fame set in, and I got famous enough that I realized I do not like fame at all. And, it got to a point where I can remember going to the mall, like to go to the mall to pick up some clothes, like, oh, I got to go shopping. I go to the mall and I would start getting stopped all the time to the point where I'm like, man, I'd have to leave the mall because it became so problematic. And then I would realize like, oh, Spike TV showed my fight last night and I'm fresh in everybody's mind. And keep in mind at that time, there were only 3 or 4 fights a year initially, and so there was a lot of marketing. Like if the last fight was in March and the next fight wasn't until June or July, all you heard was Rich Franklin, Rich Franklin, Rich Franklin, Rich Franklin. Like, so it really helped establish the brand at that time. And because it wasn't just moving on to the next thing, people got very attached to their favorite fighters and the storylines behind them. And so now it's kind of like, it's difficult to keep up, particularly with all the organizations that we have. And, but yeah, I mean, there are times where, I couldn't go to a festival and like throw a dart at a balloon and win my girl the stuffed animal anymore because those days were done.
Yeah.
And I can remember doing an interview here in Cincinnati for a local sports radio personality. And I told him, I said, it's nice. I said, I get to fly to Vegas. I see my name. I have a blackjack table felt that has my face on it. Wow. I got like poker chips, like casino chips with my face on it. And I got pictures of me. It's how cool it is to walk into a casino like the Mandalay Bay and see you plastered everywhere and trying to pretend like it's just another Tuesday. Like, I see that every day. Of course my face is on these poker chips here. Of course it is. Like, isn't everybody's? And so that it was cool because I could go to Vegas and be that guy for a week or a weekend and then come home and be normal. And then it was almost like overnight, like that stuff changed. And I remember being out and suddenly I was like, whoa, what just happened? Yeah. And going to restaurants and stuff like that. And I mean, I made good money as a fighter. Don't get me wrong. I made way better than I would have ever made as a teacher, but I wasn't balling to the point where I could like hire security or be like, I'm going to rent this restaurant out so that I can eat tonight. Yeah. And that lasted for quite a few years, even after I lost my title, because I still maintained main event status in my career. And then that, like basically during my whole career, I never recaptured my title after Anderson beat me, but I was still either main or co-main the rest of my career. I never kind of fell in stature to the bottom of the card. And so I always maintained like, a bit of that media push that was behind me. And then now it's kind of cool walking to a grocery store and hearing, like I was eating in a restaurant with a friend of mine the other day, and this guy walks by the restaurant and it was glass window. It was in the summertime, it's a glass garage door that would open. And I'm just sitting there eating and we're talking this way. And all of a sudden I hear a knock, knock, knock on the glass, and I turn. And this guy's like, he goes, "What's Frank?" And I said, yeah. He says, oh, and he's talking to me through the glass. I can't understand a word he's saying. Other than I could tell that he was telling me this story of a time that he and I sparred. He's like, we sparred and you kicked me in the ribs. And I was like, ugh. And he's like acting this whole thing out. Yeah. And it's just like things like that happen now and they're really cool. And so, when I run into fans, I've always been this way. When I run into fans, I'm always taking the time to meet people and talk to them. Like I'm always grateful and gracious with my fans, because without them, like none of this stuff would have ever happened, And don't get me wrong, there are days where it's inconvenient when you're, having dinner on your anniversary and suddenly you get stopped a half a dozen times and people are looking at you like, really? But no, it was so things like there was good stuff and bad stuff, man. And it's, the good stuff is sometimes when you still call places, like because of what I've done, it helps open doors for me that it may not for other people. And I'm very grateful for that. So, it's, for example, if I want to go speak at a church type of thing, if I'm speaking at a church, there's probably teenage kids out there that something I might say would resonate with them better than just your average person. And so I've been given that privilege in life and I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah. That's one thing I always loved about you as a person in your career is that you always remain humbled. Like when you're winning, you're on top, you're a world champion. You would show up at AMC in Seattle and you would train. Matt would work you, he'll work me, Spencer Fisher, Jens Pulver. And then you would go out and fight. Even when you lose, you always remain the same person and humble. So I've always loved about the career. Another thing I never told you is I've always loved your physique when you would get ready for your fights. I'm like, God, he's so buff. He looks like because I grew up watching you fight, right? And so for me, I remember they used to do the behind the scenes of, you know, you getting ready for your fight, almost like the UFC countdown. Like I remember you'd be like, you do your legs, you do chest, and you always had like, you know, it's like G.I. Joes, right? You're growing up, you watch G.I. Joes, big chest, big biceps, big, you know, big guns. You model that, right? And I was like, man, he's always so fit. Even to now, like the last time we hung out, I was like, damn, Rich, you still eat like you're a world champion, right? Like, tell people about your
so
diet.
You know, this conversation right here is pushing my. I'm about half hour behind on my meal by the time we get done with this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I did that for you. No, wait, hold on. Let me just say a couple things about that. Like, I got a few reactions. Number one, literally, and this I am not saying this just because you said it. I just had a conversation. I was just having a conversation with you or about you the other day with a couple of my buddies, and we were talking about GOATs of the sport, and clearly your name came up. You're my number one vote on GOAT, pound for pound, whatever. And it's funny that you talk about my physique like that because I suffer from this case of body dysmorphia legitimately, where I look at myself in the mirror and I can find 10 things I don't like before I find 10 things that I do, literally. And so it's funny because we were talking about you the other day and I was talking about your physique and I was like, imagine DJ, if because the way you're proportioned, I was like, imagine him at like 205, like, cause I'm 220 now. I was like, imagine if he was my size. Cause I was telling the story. Remember the time that you and I were training and it was the end of my day and Matt put you in my guard. Do you remember this? Oh God. And I was like, and I was telling the story. I was like, he wouldn't quit moving. Like I was trying to grab a hold of him. I was so tired. I was spent. And Matt was like, you're going to grapple with DJ. And I was like, okay, I can do this because I'm bigger than him. And he's like, get in your guard. And then you were on top of me. And it was just like, it was literally like a spider monkey that took like a bunch of cocaine and drank Mountain Dew after Mountain Dew after Mountain Dew, and it just wouldn't stop. It's like you wouldn't stop. And I remember I was just so tired, but I was telling the story, and anyway, I was talking about your physique. But on that note, I can't remember which buddy it was. Maybe my buddy Sean Bolin I was talking to the other day, and he asked, he's like, you know, what's DJ like in real life? I'm like, dude, most humble guy I've ever met. Like literally said these words about you the other day. And that's what, like, I think that's what makes, you know, people like you and I champions in one essence, because there was a time where I was in the gym and I was grappling and there was a blue belt in the gym and we were doing a technique and this blue belt started showing something and I stopped and I was like, show me this again. And he was just amazed that I was listening to him. And I'm like, man, I can learn from anybody. Like you got stuff that I'm not good at. And so, you know, and he was just like, wow, he's like, that's why you're a champion. I'm like, yeah, man. I mean, I don't know everything. And, you know, I think for me, maintaining some bit of like to maintain humility in my life. Well, number one, I think losing my title had quite a bit to do with that. And I have a whole story behind that, like a faith-based story of how that affected me in a good way. But I always say this, like for every person on this planet that knows who I am, there's probably 100 that don't care. Probably, and that's giving myself more credit than I probably deserve. 1,000, 10,000, whatever. It's just like for every one person that knows who I am, there's so many people that don't, and they don't care. And so, and when I keep that in mind, I'm like, no, there's some people that look up to me, and that's awesome. But at the end of the day, I put my pants on one leg at a time, like everybody else.
Yeah.
So if I can master that 2-leg pant pull up, maybe I will be better than everybody.
You separate yourself from everybody. But I feel like, you know, you never really truly came out and said, hey, I'm retiring from the sport of mixed martial arts, right? You haven't been active for a while, but you still, it's an inspiration for me because I've, you know, officially announced that I was retired, you know, in September. But it's an inspiration for me when I look at you, you're still fit. You're still strong. You still eat like you still eat like a world champion. You know, you have a couple of guys who still do it. GSP is another person who stays fit, who keeps on working out, and that's always been a big inspiration for me. So, thank you for, you know, paving that way for me to have somebody to look at as, you know, a goal to reach. When I reach your age, I still want to be like, oh man, look at me, I'm still just like Rich GSP, still shredded, still fit. I don't want to be like,
listen, you're making me feel good and old at the same time, dude. Like, I'm gonna smack you when I see you, just so you know.
Okay, now let's talk about what you're doing now. You transitioned from mixed martial arts, being a world champion. You lost your belt. You know you had some good fights, some bad fights. And I never forget when you broke Chuck Liddell broke your arm, or you hit him with the left hand, and you're like, yeah, I knocked him out, but he broke my arm. I never forget that because you're still training at AMC. Yeah. Let's talk about the role you're in now with ONE Championship, right? So what made you what brought you to that role in where you're at now, right? I think it's totally different. You don't see a lot of athletes go into that role in mixed martial arts, right? It's kind of like you come to the sport and you make your money, then you disappear, right? There's so many athletes that I can name that have done that, to where you went a different path. Now you're part of an organization that's based in, Singapore. Tell me about like how this came about.
Well, so it came about because Matt and I taught a seminar down in Singapore, and then we met some of the powers that be that were at the time starting ONE Championship. And when I got to know people, they just said, hey, when you're retired, if you're ever interested in a job, let us know. So when I initially got hired on by ONE Championship, I don't think they knew what they were going to do with me exactly, because they had this guy who within the industry, I'm famous, but I'm also college educated. I speak well. I can handle myself in a boardroom or a seminar or on television doing commentary. So I have all of these different skill sets that are applicable in different places. And so it took the company, well, I'll say this, it didn't take the company, it did take the company initially time to kind of figure out how they were going to use me. And then they began using me in ways that, and like I said, I'm kind of like mortar. If they ask me to go do something, I'll just fill in wherever I need to fill in on top of my normal responsibilities. But it's just, there's a love for MMA. I mean, I've been training. This is all I really know, right? Anymore. And so when it comes to, I didn't make enough money to just flat out retire. And part of that is because I have a moving goalpost in life. And, it's like, oh, I have this goal of getting here or getting here. And then suddenly when I get to here, it's like financially, I'm like, oh, well, I really want to be here. And so, that's part of my problem as well. But when I think about what am I going to do? Like, what else would I do? Would I go back to teaching high school? Not possible. I don't think I could get through a day of school without smacking a student at this point in time, especially some of the stuff that I see on social media. I'm just like, oh Lord, thank you. Thank you for me not having to teach anymore. But I will say that I do enjoy like tutoring people. I have friends that, it's funny. I have friends that call me like, hey, can you tutor my kid? I'm sure. And then after I tutor them, like, what do I owe you? I'm like, you nothing. They're like, no, I got to pay you something. I'm like, listen, if I charge you what my hourly rate is, like, you're not going to want to pay that bill. So just pro bono this one, trust me. Like, and I like doing that. I like helping people out that have problems with things like that, because they're motivated to learn. But I don't know what else I would do. So being involved in this industry has been really cool. And fortunately, as I've worked for ONE over more than a decade now, I've had the privilege of being put in several different roles for this company. So I haven't been, for example, commentating for the last 12 years. And because I think if I've been commentating for the last 12 years, I'd get to a point where I'm like, yeah, I'm over this. I need something else. But fortunately, I've been able to do different things for the company. And so it's kept me mentally engaged and focused on the things I need to do. New challenges like anything else. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up here and kind of what I do.
And now the role you're focused on, you're based in the States now. You're trying to go to every single, because a lot of people don't understand this, right? With ONE Championship, they have a lot of different rules, right? The hydration is different from the American-based organization. They also have, knees or grounded opponent. And a lot of people don't understand, like, when you want to bring a different set of rules to America, you have to get it approved by the commission. And I believe Denver, Colorado, Atlanta, Florida, I believe those three are the ones that accept the rules. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And
we're not in Florida yet. Not in Florida yet.
We'll
get there though.
But
no,
dude, they don't accept the rule set.
Yeah, I have a list of 8 states that have accepted, that have approved the rule set. So, but you got to keep in mind that it's not just, look, anytime I'm talking to somebody, and if you're a spectator watching the sport, the elephant in the room when you're talking about fighter safety and with commissions or whatever is the knees to head of a grounded opponent. it's it's just as simple as that. Like, it boils down to that. There are other rule differences that could be problematic depending on the way that the state commissions are set up, and with the state laws and how any changes that need to be made. Particularly, for example, with our judging, we use different judging and scoring criteria than everybody else. We don't judge round by round. We don't use that 10-point must system in MMA. We basically look at the fight in its entirety and use one whole round to judge it. So when at the end of round 1, when minute 5 is over and round 2 starts and minute 6 begins, it's just the 6th minute of the fight, and you continue judging. There is no stealing rounds, and so this is a significant thing that the viewers at home may not understand, because, like most people, there is a part of you that when you're sitting there and you're looking at two guys at the end of a fight, you're like, which guy would I rather be when I go home tonight?
Yep.
Right. It's like if I caught you in 3 almost near submissions and you were gurgling 3 times and you were able to get through that choke, but then you kind of beat the crap out of me, but maybe not as much as I was almost submitted you. I'm like, I'd still rather be the guy without all the lumps on his head when he goes home that night, right? And so there's this, our scoring criteria accounts for that with the damage categories, and you're very familiar with these things too, right? Our damage categories are so specified that they break down into 3 categories of damage within the damage category itself. So there are a lot of differences that people wouldn't understand. And the reason why this is important when we come into the US, because people would say, well, I run into a question like, well, why don't you guys just use the unified rule set? And I'll say, well, that would be like the NFL going to Canada and playing a game. And then the Canadian Football League saying, you need to use our rule set. Well, it's different because they play on a 55, like they play on a 110-yard field. The end zones are 20 yards deep. You can motion towards the line of scrimmage in the CFL. This completely changes the dynamic of the game. So it's not the same game. It's the same game. It's football, but these minor differences can make things significantly different. So the question that you would have to ask yourself is, for example, would you have lost your fight to Adriano Moraes if he couldn't knee you to the head on the ground, right?
Yeah.
If the rules were manipulated, would you have lost that fight? And that's that. So then it's like, well, if you were fighting under that rule set, then how can you validate a victory like that under a different rule set?
Yep.
And so it has to stay consistent. Otherwise, we would just have to completely run away from that altogether and change the whole organization.
Yeah, that was the biggest scene when that fight happened, right? Because it was like my 5th fight in the organization, and I love. I've gone on record multiple times saying I love knees to the head and the ground, right? Like coming from Matt Hume, who worked in Pride, Dream, and the head stomps, it progressed. It makes the fight progress, because I've had fights in the UFC when I fought John Dotson the first time, he was playing that grounded opponent. And I'm like, dude, stop. And I need him. And then, what's this gentleman's name? One of the fucking, John McCarthy, John McCarthy, right? He was a referee. He was like, dude, he's like,
Big John.
Yeah, Big John. He was like, time. He goes, you can't. I was like, dude, I ain't got time to look if this motherfucker is putting his hand on the ground or not. Like, let me do my job and put this man away. And they stopped it. And so you see in ONE Championship, even in, other organizations like Ryzen, they allow knees to the ground on an opponent, and it forces the fight to keep on going. And I'll never forget, Aljamain Sterling, when he fought Peter Yan, me and Aljo are great friends now. We already squashed the beef. Well, there was no beef, but I was honest. He was playing that game. He was on his knees, and Peter Yan just kneed the hell out of him, and then that caused a disqualification. And I was like, dude, you can't be begging on your knees. Then, 2 months later, I get blasted by Adriano in the face, and I get knocked out. He goes, isn't it a vicious cycle, Demetrious? But I like knees to ground an opponent on the ground because he keeps the fight going. Nobody can really stall in that position. And it's also another easy way to get away from it. Right? Like if I shoot a bad shot, you sprawl, you knee me in the head, I can put my hands out and block my head, or I can sit back to my butt and pull guard. Now you're back on my guard. It's keeping the fight going. Whereas now, if I shoot and you aren't a good grappler, you're almost like, what do I do with you? Do I punch you? I'm almost stopping the progression of the fight. So I've always loved that about ONE Championship. Another thing I've always loved is the weight cutting. I still don't understand, and I think it's probably just the American culture with wrestling, because even today, children who are 8, 9, even jiu-jitsu tournaments are cutting weight. And I've never understood it. I mean, I went through it, right? Like, I fought at 135. I was just a small 135er in the UFC. When I was fighting Dominic Cruz, I was coming on weighing 138, right? So I'm going to cut a couple pounds to make that weight. Obviously, when I fought Dominic Cruz, He suplexed me 4 times. Dominic Cruz, I never forgave you about that. You know this.
Oh, that's who was in Pendleton with us. Dominic Cruz, by the way. He was the 4th.
Okay. Yeah, but I was just too small for the division. When they made 125, man, I never forget cutting 12 pounds, 8.5 pounds for some fights, and I was dry. I was so ashy. If you would have, if I would have clapped my hands, I probably would have started a fire, right? Once I went to ONE Championship and I went to 135, I was like, oh, this is perfect. I'm not cutting this much weight. The guys I'm fighting, I actually like when ONE Championship made it, you have to weigh in 2 times and pass hydration 2 times before you fight, because that was truly, you could not cheat the system. You just couldn't do it, right? And I think a lot of people don't understand, like, that was a lot healthier too for the athletes, right? To give more, because a lot of people don't understand, how do they test hydration in ONE Championship? Like, I try to explain it. Maybe you can explain it better than I can.
Yeah. So when your kidneys, what they're designed to do is filter out sediments that are in your system. Like, and the more liquid you have, the more often you pee, in essence. Yep. And so when you have more liquid that you're peeing out, the amount of sediments that are in your system is less in proportion to the water. So we use an instrument called a refractometer. Mm-hmm. And the instrument, we have a certain marker that we set it at, and anything below that line basically says that you are dehydrated, meaning you have too much sediment in your system. And so it's about making sure that not only, anything can affect hydration. Anything like taking caffeine or not drinking enough fluid or not having the proper electrolytes in your system, because just drinking fluid, you can drink distilled water and still end up becoming dehydrated off of distilled water, in essence. So it's not just as simple as drinking water, but really it kind of is. In essence, what this has allowed you to do, and going back to the comment that you made about people cutting weight in the combative industry is just a cultural thing, not just to Americans, but it's just the way things have always been done. It doesn't matter if you're boxing or if you're wrestling, or even in jiu-jitsu tournaments, people have to weigh in with their gis on. Mm-hmm. And because of this, there is this psychology that comes with it. And I think this way, I've thought this way before. If I can weigh in and I can manage my weight cut better than my opponent, and I come in and I can be 3 pounds heavier than him, then I have an advantage. But nobody ever thinks that way when they're training in the gym on a Tuesday night. Like, oh, I'm grappling this guy and he's 3 pounds heavier than me. He's got a huge advantage. Mm-hmm. Your mind doesn't work that way, but when it comes to the fight, it does. And I think that is one of the biggest obstacles or challenges for ONE Championship, is making the athletes understand, like, it doesn't really matter in the end. Like, this is just like a Tuesday night. You're fully hydrated, you're fed, you're fueled properly so you can output. And I believe that's part of the reason why the fights that we have are high pace, good finish rates, is because athletes can perform at their highest levels, not coming off of a dehydrated state of being. Because I would cut weight, and I would walk around somewhere between 205 and 210 is where I would keep myself. And I would try to and I had a water loading system that I would do. And by Monday, I would definitely be below 205. I wanted to cut less than 20 pounds on fight week, which meant that and it would step down. Monday I would lose a little bit, and Tuesday I would cut out my carbs, and then it came through nutritional management, and then I would begin to strip my water, and then you would do the sauna, or some people do the salt baths or whatever. I never liked the salt baths. I was a sauna guy, and I would sit there and just continue to dry myself off. Mm-hmm. Wrestlers would use the credit cards all the time. Yep. And go about it that way. And that's how I did mine. And so, I would typically, the night before I weighed in, have 12 pounds to go. I would do half of them that night. So I wasn't fully dehydrated. I could still semi-sleep that night fairly well. And then hopefully, and I rarely ever did, but hopefully I'd float a pound or two overnight. Because now, like, when I weigh myself at night, from night to morning, I'll typically float 3 to 4 pounds overnight, like between my metabolism and whatever I pee when I get up in the morning type of thing. I'll typically go through about 3.5, 4 pounds of weight from nighttime to morning. So when I'm weighing in, like, when I was cutting weight, I was hoping like maybe I'll float a pound. I only have to do like 4 or 5 tomorrow. No, so it's because you were so dehydrated at that point. It was still another 6. So I get up and do my final 6 that day. And then I would be on point at 185 for a matter of 2 hours. and then immediately hit the peanut butter, honey, and banana sandwiches with my coconut water. And I had a stepping up system to ramp myself back up. And at that time, we were allowed to hydrate with IVs.
Yep.
It was legal. I don't understand why that's illegal, because you just put saline water back into you. But yeah, and then I would typically do a half liter of saline that night, and then another half liter the following morning. And then I would be back to 206, 207 by fight time. When I fought...
imagine that, though. Imagine that system you just did. You just laid out with nobody. I mean, the industry, nobody in the industry. Like, if you guys listen to this right now, nobody... It's fucking mind-blowing of what you just described.
Well, and this is the thing. Keep in mind the story I told you when I overcut for the Corey fight, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can go back. I have a picture. I keep a picture of me on the phone from the last time that I cut to 185. And when I show this picture to people and how gaunt and like my eyes are like sunken in, like I look like a skull with skin on it.
Yeah.
And in my knee bones, like I'm sitting in the chairs at the arena waiting to do the weigh-ins, like my knee bones just like it just looks like I'm malnourished.
Yeah.
And I see these athletes that are getting up on these scales now that are just so gaunt they can barely stand there. And the athletes that have passed out weighing in, I'm like, man. And the thing about it is, and this is the one thing, a part of the reason why ONE Championship implemented this is because when it comes to concussion protocols, when you dehydrate the body, the last place that rehydrates is the brain cavity. It's one of the last places that rehydrates. So when you deplete fluid, like you're depleting fluid from everywhere, which means you have a reduced amount of fluid in your brain, and the brain floats. It's not attached, like it floats, and that's what causes concussion, because that brain's floating, and when the skull hits it, it's banging back and forth on the. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So even doing that like shakes your brain around, right? Like just that little, So when you're dehydrated, it only amplifies the effects of a concussion, which later on in life, I sit and think about all the weight cutting that I've done, and I'm like, thank you, Lord, that I don't have any major CTE issues or anything like that on the back end of life. Because when you're 25 years old, you'll walk through a brick wall if you're told to. I'll sit in that sauna until I die.
Yep.
But then suddenly when you're 40 years old and you're looking at retirement and you think like, okay, I had this 10-year window that I'm trading for the rest of my life. And if I'm dealing with any kind of health problems, particularly mental issues, I mean, it's one thing to have broken bones or whatever and torn joints and bum knees or whatever. You're going to deal with these things the rest of your life. Athletes are. But when you lose your cognition, that's, so the industry in itself should be doing everything that it can to keep that from happening. So that's one thing that I'm really glad that ONE from an early point took it on themselves to be a leader in that particular area.
But I hope that I hope all organizations get on board with that, because it gives the longevity of the fighter. Because I was able to fight until I was 37 and win world titles at that age, instead of, I don't think I could have done that at be 37, cutting to 125. It just, I just fucking.
I remember the last time I cut weight, and I was sitting in a sauna, and as you get older, it's more difficult for the weight to come off of you, especially. And I just remember sitting there thinking like, oh man, what am I doing? Why? To this day, my friend's like, hey, you want to go sit in the sauna? I'm like, no.
My wife, so I use the hot tub, not hot tub. I use the tub method, just boil myself, right? And so my wife, Destiny, she goes, babe, we should, be sexy if you ran some bath water with me, throw some roses in there, and we jump in the tub. And I was like, I'm not getting that fucking tub. Like, I'm not getting in that tub, because it reminds me of when I used to boil myself to try to cut 7.5 pounds. I was like, so it ruins it for me, right? But I'll do sauna, I'll do cold plunge for recovery, but hot tubs ain't going on in my life right now. No way in hell.
Yeah. Same way my friends last week in the sauna. I'm like, absolutely not. Or like, you know what else is popular? These ice baths now, and people getting these ice baths. I'm like, I'll use an ice bath, but it's like, I know I have a pond in my backyard here, and this is my natural ice bath, and I'll take a few dips in it this winter. But people just assume that you just enjoy getting in there. I'm like, no, I got to put myself in a different mental spot where I'm like, I'm ready to embrace the suck. And if I'm not willing to do that, I'm like, no. So I can embrace the suck anytime I need to, but otherwise I'm like, there's no need for me to just go jump in this pond or some ice bath or a sauna and sit there with you for 40 minutes to prove a point. I'm not doing it. No.
Yep.
So
been there, done that, ain't doing it no more. Okay, so what are the things we can look forward to in 2025 with ONE Championship? I know some big fights on the horizon. I know Rodtang Takura. Rodtang had a good showing in his last fight. I know Takura did as well. Tell me what we can look forward to in 2025 from ONE Championship.
Well, I mean, so show side of things, we're making some moves. I don't know if you heard about the Beast in Me deal that we did with the Russell Crowe movie, but we're gonna be filming that at our January event at Impact Arena in Bangkok. That's gonna be pretty cool. I'll be there for that to witness that. It'll be interesting to see how a movie tapes during a live event. I've never seen that. I've never seen that before. That never happened at any of my fights when I was competing. So that will be nice to see from a commentary perspective. But then we'll have 2 shows on ground in the U.S. next year. And I don't think we have released the cities that we're going to yet, but that'll be coming. I'm excited about that. That's the labor of some of my work that I've done. And we should be having some news about Qatar and a few other big shows that are coming up. Everything's looking amazing with Prime Video. And then on the fight side of things, there's going to be some interesting matchups. I think Rodtang versus Takaro is going to be one that I'm really looking forward to. There's been a lot of hype behind this fight for years now, and so this one looks like it's finally getting done. But I would be interested in watching. I would be interested in watching a rematch between Anatoly and Rogrog, especially if we could do that one in the cage instead of the ring.
Yeah, that fight
that would be a fun one to run back.
Yeah, that was a good fight, and I feel like Rogrog is in this position where I saw you made the comment like when you became a world champion, you came home, there was no parade. This man comes home back to his country,
dude,
and it was fucking bananas. I was like, it's just and that's the thing that like. Mixed martial arts in some parts of the world is still small. It's still not big, right? But he comes home and it's just massive, like a celebration, And
the president of the country greeted him, and I mean it was the whole country basically shut down.
Yeah.
But the same thing happened. The same thing happened for Tang Kai when he went back to China.
Yep. Tang Kai when he went back to China.
But I'll tell you what, even when I was doing some recruiting for ONE Championship, shooting in Mongolia, the president of Mongolia had requested me to come to his office. It's a big deal to particularly in places like Mongolia or where Senegal is, like these places are known for their combative arts, right? And so it's a much bigger deal there. And in the United States, there's just so much going on that they're not throwing DJ a parade.
No,
it's just not happening.
Well, that's the thing that's so crazy about Anatoly is that he was a 3-divisional champion, like 3 belts, and like the biggest thing for me was like, fuck man, you got 3 belts? Ain't nobody for you. And it's like, how do you defend? What belt do you defend? And and it's so crazy because it's never been done in my lifetime in mixed martial arts. But he was a 3-divisional champion and taking on Rogrog, and that was a great fight back and forth. There was a little kind of complication, like you said, with the ring, and hopefully they could run it back in a cage to see how that fight plays out. And it was a great fight, a battle of the heavyweight champions, heavyweight. There's some big fucking boys. There were some big boys in there,
dude. I mean, what's the total amount of beef that was in the ring that night? Like probably like
500. I feel 500 is safe to say.
Oh no, I'll take the over on 500 for sure.
Okay, over on that. Man, well, I'm excited to see what happens next for ONE Championship. I think the biggest fight I'm looking forward to is Rodtang versus Takuru, because both those guys, I mean, they both fought Super Lake. I think Super Lake's the king ding-a-ling, and when it comes to kickboxing, Muay Thai, because he's beat both of those guys, not just from his, and he also knocked out John Haggerty. I was there live in Denver, Colorado. I feel he's probably the GOAT right now when it comes to Muay Thai and kickboxing, because nobody could touch him. He's so systematically, you have, Super Bond, you have Taiwan Chai, you have those guys, but I feel like, pound for pound, it is probably Super Lake. And then hopefully Super Lake can fight the winner of Rodtang versus Takura. I've always felt like Reese McLaren has always been a dark horse in the flyweight division, right? Just because he's very tough. He was in the World Grand Prix. He fought Kairat Akhmatov, lost that fight. Kairat Akhmatov didn't, I think he got injured or something. Then it went with Reese McLaren taking on Danny Kingdad. Danny Kingdad ended up out wrestling Reese McLaren. Then I ended up fighting, Danny Kingdad in the World Grand Prix. Then I went out to fight Adriano, got my face blasted. But I feel like Reese McLaren has always been there. He's very well-rounded, very tough. And he's another guy that I've always been a big fan of. I think the winner of Jared Brooks taking on Reese McLaren can fight Adriano for the inaugural flyweight champion that I just recently, I brought it home with me. It's right behind me. They can fight for a new one, and I'm excited for that fight too. So let's see how things are going to shake out, and let's see who's going to be next for that fight.
It'll be interesting to see how that stuff shakes out, because then I think what would be a huge 2025 year is seeing Demetrious Johnson come out of retirement. I'm just saying. Listen, I'm talking as a fan right now.
Man, it's so funny because I just was recently in St. Louis and I was working with Joaquin Buckley, and I was just moving. And he was like, "Damn, fam, you sure you done?" I was like, "Yeah, man. There's nothing left for me to prove." Like I said before, you're an inspiration to me. You went out when you're ready to go out. You're still intelligent. You still look great. If you wanted to fight, I remember I was trying to get you and Vitor Belfort, trying to get you guys to fight to run it back and win championship. You're like, nah, I'm good. So I'm gonna be on your boat.
What did I say about that when you said that? Do you remember?
You were like, I don't think he'll pass a drug test.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so for me, I'm done. I'm happy. I still can move. I still can fight if I wanted to, but I'd like to be on this side of the fence where I'm still involved in the sport by breaking fights down, getting excited as a fan of the next up-and-comers, and just enjoy these guys. Because I'm 38 years old. I'm like, my brain's still healthy.
Listen, man, you're smart about it, because look, it's my first love, and it's been a while since I fought. So do I ever think about it? Sure. But I turned 50 this year, man. So it's like, the reality is that I'm 50.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Ong Law one time, and Ong Law said it best. He said, at this age, it's like being a vintage car. If you've ever driven a classic car before, you got to prime the engine a little bit, get a little bit of fuel in that carburetor, get that thing started up, let it sit there and idle, for a little bit, rev the engine a few times, after it idles a few minutes, then you take it, gingerly drive it for the first, quarter mile, whatever. And then once it's moving, man, that car can go.
Yep.
It can perform. But then, it's like when I'm done, because I like being able to go to the gym and still work with some of these young guys, and I can make a lot of young guys look really, really dumb. And it feels good at this age when I walk out and I'm sparring with somebody, I'm like, listen, man, take it easy on this old man, right? And then you're like 3 rounds deep and they're like, what the heck? Like, why did you retire? It's a good feeling.
Yes.
But so don't get me wrong. I think about it from time to time, but I will say this. Like you, I retired at a time where mentally I was burned out before I was physically.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, I came off of a loss as my last fight, but when I looked at where I was standing at that time, the thought of just taking a fight for money didn't make sense to me. And I thought to myself, like, well, if I want to recapture this title now with this loss, I've set myself back at least 3 years, and I'm looking at my age and I'm like, oh man, that'll put me fighting past 40 for sure. And I knew that I didn't have that kind of juice in me, especially not mentally. And so I was at a point in time where I was mentally ready to give up the sport. And that's important, man, because otherwise you're sitting there with that woulda, coulda, shoulda mentality the rest of your life. And you're like, I'm good with it. And I'm good with it too. It'd be fun. Yeah. It'd be fun to run one, I'd have a good time. I'm sure I'd also probably when I'm sitting in the hospital that night going like, why did I decide to do this again? But no, there's no part of me that's like, oh, woulda, coulda, shoulda, this or that or whatever. If if something like that came around, it would be just for a fun thing type of deal. Yep. And so it's good that because you're so young, man, and you didn't sustain. Did you have any major surgeries in your career?
Oh, I had both shoulders, right hand, and broken my rib, broken my leg, and that's about it. So just the double shoulders and my right hand. That was the only surgery I've ever had in my career in mixed martial arts. So
I'd much rather break a bone than anything else, because bones, like when Chuck broke my bone, the bone healed, and this is good. Yep. But you start tearing joints and stuff like that. And those things, they come back to haunt you later. Yep. I will say this, like, man, it's like my back is stiff more often. I really gotta like spend time loosening myself up from time to time. But aside from that, I had 2 knee surgeries, and that thing gives me a little bit of problem. But otherwise, my body feels really good. Otherwise, so.
It looks good too. Real quick, Michael, you got any question for Rich Franklin? I'm gonna use the restroom real quick. Rich, Michael, go ahead, Abby. What you got for him, Michael?
Yeah, hey Rich, nice to meet you. First of all, you're not just saying this. You're a legend of the sport. It's an honor for me to have you on this podcast. But one question I wanted to ask: my favorite fighter of all time, and who I think might be the GOAT if you had to say one form of a fighter. I'm not saying overall resume, but one form of a fighter. Anderson the Spider Silva.
For sure.
What was it like? You didn't have to just fight him once in his prime, but 2 times. Can you kind of describe for people who just want to know what it's like to be in an octagon with someone like that level? What was it like fighting Anderson Silva in his prime?
Yeah, when we fought Anderson the first time, I overestimated or underestimated him and his ability, particularly in his clinch work, which obviously showed in the fight. And so when I went into the second fight, we made a bunch of changes to the training for that match. And I actually, when I go back and I watch that first round, I was doing really well. I think I was winning the first round until he caught me right before the 10-second call came out at the end of the round. And I always say to people that fighting someone like Anderson, because he really is playing a high-level game of physical chess in the ring. Fighting someone like Anderson is difficult, but when you walk out in the second round of a match and you're fighting 2 of him, because that's what you see, it's even more problematic. And so my chances went to basically 0 of winning that match. But yeah, Anderson is definitely on my list of GOATs. I would argue for DJ in the overall category just because DJ basically invents his submissions sometimes in the ring and rectifies losses and things of that nature. So different breed there. But yeah, it's tough, man. You're fighting high level guys, and those are the kind of guys that I asked for my entire career and the guys that I wanted to fight the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, you run through your tapology and you fought just the guys that you fought: Chuck Liddell, Vanderlei Silva twice. You fought even the OGs like Forrest Griffin, and just everything that you had to do. Even Ken Shamrock, which I remember that fight fondly because, like you said, I was watching just like anyone else. That's what got me into MMA around my age, the Stephen Bonner, Forrest Griffin. But I do remember you main eventing, because if you see behind me, I'm a big pro wrestling fan. So I wanted Ken Shamrock to kick your ass, and then you just, dude, as a young kid, you just disappoint me right there.
I was teaching high school at the time, and I was teaching the at-risk program, and all the kids knew who Ken Shamrock was because he'd crossed over. Mm-hmm. And so they would ask, like, do you think you could beat Ken Shamrock? I was like, yeah, that'd be easy. And then suddenly the fight gets signed. And I remember standing there across that cage, and I was like, oh, man, I ran my mouth to a bunch of kids playfully. And now it's time to see where the rubber meets the road on this thing, being so nervous on that. And that was the first time they ever did a fight live TV. Like, our face-off was like, I don't know, 18 minutes long or something, because they like cut the commercial after they brought us into the ring and everything. So I'm just standing there like locked eyes, and yeah, I was like, man, it was fond memories, fun stuff.
Dan Henderson, 2 Feeder Belfort. I don't think there's a dude. We could talk forever about this. DJ and I always talk about it, but these days you're able to strategically not fight these guys. Mm-hmm. Fighters know how to do it right, but back in your day, it was like, dude, I'll fight anyone, like anytime, any weight class. There wasn't ducking or anything like that. So
no, you couldn't. There were it was always top level guys. You didn't have the roster depth to choose the tomato cans here and there, right? And so that's what happened. My first fight was Evan Tanner, like I said, and that was actually, I'll call it we accepted that fight late because his opponent got injured. I don't remember who. I had plenty of prep time for it, but it was maybe like a 5 or 6 week camp or something like that. And that's how I got in. But immediately I was fed to the Sharks. And when you look at my entire career, I fought Edwin Deweese as my next match, and he was an up and comer just like what I was. He was just as legit as me. That fight, I made it look easy in that fight, but it happened to be a good performance for me that night. The same, and not as necessarily a good performance for him. But yeah, I mean, it was just from the beginning of my career on, I was swimming with the sharks from day one, and now I see guys and the way that they can navigate through their careers, and I'm like, really?
He's like, must be nice. It must be fucking nice.
Yeah, it's treat it like a business. So they're smarter than me, I guess.
Nah. Well, like you said, your era, me and Michael always talk about, your era was a golden era, right? Where it's like you had every card was a banger, every main event was awesome, and I'll never forget like just watching you fight Nick Horry, and then when you fight Anderson, when you fight Vitor, when you fight Chuck Liddell, it was always a special moment. And then getting the opportunity to train with you at AMC with Matt, and then to even be able to do some work with you when ONE Championship came to America for the first time, it's always been a pleasure of mine. Before I let you go, I got one question for you. What you gonna do with your check when it come in the mail from the UFC? What you gonna do with your check?
You know what? I didn't turn my paperwork in on time. So
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm bad about that stuff. So yeah, I didn't get my paperwork in because the deadline was like the 22nd or something like that. So well, I'm not gonna have a check. Well.
Let me ask you this question. What do you think about that lawsuit? Because I felt like you were right in that time at the very beginning where you said, the sport wasn't at the point where it is now, right? And do you feel like, how do you feel about the whole thing essentially? Like, do you feel like they use, not correct practices to get the fighters? I always look at like slap fighting. That's a perfect example right now where, Dana White's came out and said that the thing's like worth $500 to $900 million. They're making a shit ton of money. You have these guys who are going to slap the shit out of each other every night. They're going to CTE, believe it or not, because I'm going to stand here. I'm going to take the biggest slap in the world. I'm going to get back up and do it over and over again, almost like boxing. I don't know what they're getting paid, but I feel like it's almost like, I'm sure now in their contract, they have it in there like, hey, you're signing up for this. You can't come back and sue us in 5 to 10 years when we sell for, $11 billion. But what are your thoughts on the UFC lawsuit? Because you're right in that time frame, I feel like.
Here's what I would have liked to have seen out of this whole thing. I don't know enough about the emails that were released and how much was going on. Clearly, the athletes were at a disadvantage. They were the only organization. You didn't have any negotiating ability because there was no competition. If you went to an organization, and this is not me talking trash, I'm just spitting out fact. Yeah. If you went to the UFC and said, "Here's what I want to make," and they're like, "No, this is what we're going to pay you," then you're like, "No, I'm going to go. Never mind. I'll go ahead and sign this contract because it's my only option." And so that's the way things were. There were no competing organizations at the time at the top level. And so a business is not in the business of giving out money, right? It's your job to go, get what you're due, get what you're worth. Mm-hmm. And so I would have never complained if the UFC would have added another decimal place or two, for that matter, to my paycheck. Yep. I wouldn't have been like, you don't need to do that. So it would have been nice. It would have been nice to be able to truly retire and have enough money to be like, I am set. Yep. But that wasn't the nature of the industry at that time either. And I made way better money than I ever would have made as a math teacher. I always keep this in mind. And what I wish would have come out of this is the one thing I wish, that they would have had at that time a pension plan where they had a matching, where whatever you put into a retirement, they will match at a percentage or whatever. And the other thing is lifetime health care, particularly for tenured guys. I gave almost 10 years to the organization. Yep. So for me to have health care for the rest of my life is not really a big ask. I could care less about this check that's coming, whatever amount of money I'm going to get because my fights or would have gotten or whatever would have overlapped that time. I could care less about that. If I'm getting a $50,000, $100,000 check, like whatever, money's money and I can always make more money. But it's like to have good premium healthcare, to know that I'm taken care of for the rest of my life because I put my body on the line for somebody else. That's what I would have wanted. And that's my takeaway from this whole thing. Like, I think in the end, it's nice that, some fighters are going to get bigger checks than other fighters, and great, kudos to them. But, when you're sitting there in your 60s and 70s and things are really starting to break down because you put your body on the line for something like this, you're going to start thinking like, yeah, this probably would have been a good thing. And I mean, they have a healthcare set up for other organizations, like other sports, like the NFL. You know, if you've been so many years in the league, you get healthcare for the rest of your life, and it's good premium healthcare. And you know, because healthcare is not cheap.
Nope.
So that's I wish that there would have been a retirement pension fund and some healthcare, particularly the healthcare would have come out of something like this. That would have been nice.
Boom. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. That is our guest, Rich Ace Franklin. Rich, is there anything you want to tell the fans how they can follow you, support you with, take a look out for, you know, an upcoming, you know, this is your time on the floor to let people know how they can support you.
Nah, I mean, look, yeah, I could pump my personal socials in here, but I don't really hard post anyway because I just don't care. I'm too busy doing all the cool crap in life that other people post about, honestly. But I mean, you can check me out on Instagram or Facebook or wherever. I got handles on those places. Google them if you want them.
Boom. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that is our guest, Rich Franklin. I am your host, Demetrious Johnson. That's my co-host, Michael Wantover, and we'll see you guys at the next episode of the MightyCast. All right. In 3, 2, 1. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Mighty Recap. And this is the part of the episode where we recap everything we just went through with our guest. And our guest was Rich Ace Franklin. The first thing that comes to mind is that a lot of you guys who listen to the podcast don't even know who that is. But he is one of the best middleweight to ever step in the octagon in the UFC. He was the man at the time where the UFC wasn't as big. You know, we talked about it on the podcast where he wasn't defined as a UFC athlete. He was defined as his name, where now you look at the roster, you know, I've traveled around the world and I'm like, oh man, do you know who this guy is? They're like, oh, you mean, is he a UFC fighter? They can't differentiate the person from the organization. And he was part of that golden era where you had like, oh fuck, this one's gonna be Chuck taking on, you know, Randy Couture, and then the next one's gonna be Evan Tanner taking on Rich Franklin, and then you have Tim Silva taking on Andre. It's like every single UFC event, main event, was an absolute fucking banger. And me, you have talked about this. You've shown gripe that you're tighter, and it's same thing with our good friend of the show, MMA Guru. He's tired of these Apex cards. He's tired of these, you know, watered down UFC events. But UFC is so big now that people tune in just because the brand is so fucking big. And that was one of the things I loved about talking with Rich Franklin. And it was almost like an educational interview for people who to understand, like, where did the sport come from? Like, this was somebody who was in this sport before it got big. He coached Ultimate Fighter. Then back in the day, you had the coaches, they would fight each other at the main event finale. And then he goes on a run, he loses the belt, and he's still main event, co-main event. And now, I mean, what? You had Aljamain Sterling, who was the champion at the bantamweight division, one of the greatest bantamweight champions of the world. I believe his fight against Molzarv is what? It's on the prelims. I think it moved to the prelims. So it's just crazy to see the evolution of the sport where Rich Franklin has come to where he is, to where the sport is now.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen often with guests, but I had to tell him, like, man, I'm a huge fan of you and all that stuff, because he really was, when I broke in as a fan, was such a huge guy at the time. Like, the first card I really ever watched was, I was one of those Ultimate Fighter fans who I watched the first season, and you had that insane finale of Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner, but that was not the main event. That was the finale of the first Ultimate Fighter. Yeah. The main event was Rich Franklin versus Ken Shamrock, and for a lot of people, they might not remember that, but why I do is because I'm such a big pro wrestling fan that I thought, oh, Ken Shamrock's going to beat this dude's ass, and Rich Franklin knocks him out easily. His first round, I'd like to say it was a couple minutes in the first round, so it was my introduction into MMA, and then that's also why I had to ask him about Anderson Silva, because what made me realize, like, fuck, I love it and I'm not going away, was when he fought Anderson Silva. That was seeing that. It maybe is not his fondest memory, but still getting to step in there with a prime Anderson Silva. I mean, there's no fucking shame in that. It's like the absolute prime of it. Was the second. People don't really remember when Anderson Silva broke in, he goes against Lieben, right? And that was a total mismatch. All respect to Lieben, it was a total mismatch. The second fight, he already gets the title shot immediately, which you never heard of that back in the day with kind of what Kaya Sakura is getting right now, that kind of treatment. And so we didn't know what to expect, as a fan when he went against Rich Franklin, and man, it was just like, okay, this dude is what to Rich Franklin.
What is this Muay Thai clinch? And then they fought the second time, and that's when I got introduced to Rich Franklin, is because one of the things that gave Rich Franklin problems was the Muay Thai clinch. And then his manager, Monty Cox, was like, dude, you should go train with Matt Hume. He's very good in the clinch. And that's when I got introduced to Rich Franklin. And Rich Franklin was at my amateur fights. I got a chance to work with Rich to see what a world champion was like at a very young part of my career as an amateur. And I never forget training with him, seeing him do Muay Thai pads, work on the ground. And here was a world champion at the time, and he didn't even know footlocks. He didn't know certain positions. And that's where it opened my eyes to where okay, when you have to always keep on evolving as a martial artist, because here's Rich Franklin at the time, it's still the infancy stage of the UFC and mixed martial arts. It still hasn't gone, viral or worldwide. It wasn't a household thing that you'd watch every Sunday or every football or basketball. And he was still learning things, and he was always a world champion. And so that was a very small part of my career where it's okay, even though I was a world champion back in 2012, I will always come back to the gym and continue to learn, because I saw somebody who was at the peak of the sport still learning. And that's what helped me and kept me feeding me to evolve as a complete mixed martial artist. And to talk about the weight cutting, right? That's I'm going to go on a tangent here. That's why I can't watch movies and shows about mixed martial arts, because it's all fake. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of movies are fucking fake, right? Marvel's fake. I hate to break the news here, everybody. Star Wars is fake. Everything's fake. But when I see movies or shows based Warrior, never watched it, never will watch it, because it's not true. I'm gonna go on record. The new show on Netflix, The Cage, right? I haven't watched it, but you telling me that I'm a 15-time world champion, I've never got the fucking opportunity to train with John Jones, GSP, and all these guys, and you tell me this fucking guy gets the opportunity? It's never gonna happen.
No, I'm telling you a hot take I have, because I'm a massive sports fan. Yeah. Watch sports documentaries. Do not watch sports movies. I'm the same with you. Yeah, can't do it. I love documentaries where you're seeing real non-fake.
Yes,
I'm with you too. I can't watch the fake shit. Can't do it.
I'm just it's not. That's not how it goes, dude. Here's a hot take for you guys. The amateur, we just had amateur fights here in Washington State. One of the guys, he's an amateur. He's 32 years old. I'm not sure how old he is. He goes out there, has his first amateur fight. He breaks his fucking jaw. His jaw's broke from his first amateur fight. That's the reality of mixed martial arts that happens. So when it's always a show or movie that comes up, we're going to make this movie based on mixed martial arts. Don't, because there's a dark, cloud over mixed martial arts. I would never have my children be a mixed martial artist, because I don't want them to go through the shit I went through. I'm one of the lucky. If you take, it's the same thing in football, same thing in basketball, et cetera, et cetera. And this is not me throwing hate on movies and shows. It's just why I will never watch them, right? Everyone's like, oh man, you got to watch The Cage. I'm like, why? It's fake. You think GSP is ever going to train with a guy who's, trying to make it? It's never going to, I just don't like it. It paints a facade that this is how it happens. No, we have Joaquin Buckley on the MightyCast. This man made it to the big leagues. He pissed all his money away from Bellator. He ends up working at fucking Walgreens, which there's nothing wrong with that. He works at Walgreens. Then he's trying to make his way he signs to fight at 185, because it's the only way, that's the true fucking stories. And like Michael said, the documentaries, those are best. But get back to the full scope of things about the Mighty Recap. Talking to Rich Franklin and hearing the weight cut, the stuff that he went through, he walked around 210, 205, and he cut all the way down to 185. Then he talked about, being able to rehydrate with the IV. We know why it's not legal now, because people were hiding drugs or masking drugs in their IV. But it's just absolutely crazy. And I hope one day we get to a point where no more weight cutting, right? You're not going to cut, Alex Pereira, he'll cut to 185 and he blows all the way back up to like the 210. It's like, you're not even the same fucking weight class. It's like, it's just crazy how it's still, people are allowed to do it nowadays. Like, I still think they should have people fight at their weight class. You show up like jiu-jitsu. You show up, you weigh in, you go in a loaded pin, and then you fight. Like, that's how you're going to find somebody fighting at their true natural weight. That's what I hope they get to in a point in mixed martial arts, even in boxing. Because then you have in boxing, oh, you can't rehydrate. Nope, you can't rehydrate. I want to drain you, and you can't rehydrate. Fuck all that. You weigh in a day, you weigh in the morning up, you fight the night up. That's how it should be. My personal opinion, people might say, oh, you're hating da-da-da. No, that's how it should be.
Yeah, and one last shout out I wanted to give to Rich Franklin. I was kind of, when we were talking towards the end, I was mentioning his quality of opponents. This is who some of the names that he fought in his career. Evan Tanner, Lyoto Machida, Ken Shamrock, Evan Tanner again, Anderson Silva twice, Yushin Okami, Dan Henderson, Vanderlei Silva twice, Vitor Belfort, Chuck Liddell. I mean, that is... I think to fight all those guys and win most. I mean, his career record's 29-7, so he was mostly putting up dubs. That is, you can't. Back in the day, you could not duck people. You couldn't. I'm going to sit out for 6 months or a year. Like, dude, you just fought everyone. I mean, that's ridiculous strength of schedule right there.
I want you to read that off one more time. Read it off again, and I'm going to say who was a champion, who wasn't a champion. Go ahead, read it off again.
Yeah, Evan Tanner, which champion Machida. Champion. Shamrock wasn't technically, but
no.
Then Anderson Silva obviously champion. Forrest Griffin champion. Vitor Belfort champion. And Vanderlei Silva, we're gonna count Pride, and of course Chuck Liddell champion as well. So yeah, almost all of them.
So
and then Kong Lee was his last fight.
Yeah. So out of all of his fights, he's fought fucking 7 champions in his career. And then Kung Lee and the other person was Vanderlei. You said Yushin Okami wasn't a champion.
Well, yeah,
right?
He obviously had some other. I didn't list every fight he had. He beat Matt Hamill and Jason McDonald and David Loiseau and stuff like that. And Nate Quarry, as you'd mentioned, but I mean that is. I mean that is like almost every middleweight and light heavyweight champion in that era practically is who he fought. There was no easy, I mean, he could, and he mentioned it too, he could have fought longer for sure, but he only fought beasts though. I mean, so it's hard to keep going when you've reached that status of I'm only fighting this top level guy. You have to stay at that level. So I could see why he's like, yeah, I think this is the time to, if you're not going to be fighting that top level guy anymore, then maybe it's the time to hang up the gloves. And I think that is a career to be super proud of. A middleweight champion before Anderson Silva, he was considered one of the best middleweight champions of all time. But Anderson Silva, of course, just went on to break every UFC record out there. But cool for me to get to talk to him. I think the first pay-per-view I ever ordered as a fan was UFC 77, which was the second time he fought Anderson Silva. I'm pretty sure that was the first ever pay-per-view I ordered. So just shows for me, cool to get to talk to him. And for you, I know, but we weren't rolling, but you kind of said it was almost like talking to your dad, how long you've known him. So it's been it's been a long time, an old friend talking to him too, just a true OG in the sport of MMA.
Yeah, I think what I meant to say was talking to a old friend who's very respectful. He doesn't curse a lot. So when I'm around him, I try to oh hey, I don't want to like keep on cussing. He was like, come on DJ, come on. Like it's like your I always view Matt as like my father, and it's like your father's friend. You want to show respect essentially. And I think another cool thing about Rich is, like you said, he didn't have to retire. Like, he could still fight. I've seen him train. When I hung out with him after he retired, he was still eating, a great diet, still shredded, still, looking strong. But I always love to hear athletes to go out when they're ready to go out, not let the sport retire them. Liam Harris, he just retired from mixed Muay Thai, and he came out saying, man, they gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. And when he says that, I'm like, man, if he had enough money, would he declined that offer, right? So it'll be kind of curious to see what Liam Harris does when he comes back to Muay Thai, because he always talks about, man, I wish I was a lot younger. I wish I was younger now, because the sport is taking off in Muay Thai with ONE Championship. So, but I enjoyed the interview. I think a lot of people are going to love this interview just to hear about the infancy stage of mixed martial arts, because they don't talk about that. They don't talk about like their growing pains and what the athletes go through, the weight cutting, and
and it's pretty crazy seeing a white dude who had no wrestling background. I gotta say, like it is like try to think of historically any white dude who was a champion in UFC. You probably had a wrestling background. I'm trying to think of which ones didn't. I was very surprised to hear that.
Yeah, Frankie Yeager, wrestling background.
I mean Matt Hughes, Chuck Liddell,
wrestling background.
Even Chuck Liddell, who he just used it for defense, was still a very solid college wrestler. Like, so it is. I was just very surprised when he said he did no wrestling. Like a white dude in that era, Dan Henderson, Randy Couture, all wrestling.
Is Dan Henderson a white? I think Dan Henderson is like, I'll put Dan Henderson out as black. He's dark as me, dog. Right? He's pretty fucking dark.
I mean, he's definitely white, but
you think so? Look it up. What's his nationality, man? He's got a great fucking tan.
No, he's from Temecula, California, so I believe he's. I do wonder if he has maybe some Spanish descent in there.
He's got to be Indian or something. He's got a good fucking tan. I would not put him as white. I'll put him as like, I don't know, like caramel. Look it up, Michael. You got the computer right there.
I am pulling it up. I gotta go. I gotta go to his personal life, but no, he's Dan Henderson is like as American as it gets for me. He wrestled. Man, he wrestled. Oh, he wrestled at ASU. I didn't realize that.
No, I know he fucking wrestled. I'm trying to see if he's black or white. What is his nationality? We're trying to see if he's considered white or something else.
I can't really. Personal life. Here we go. Oh, he is of Native American, English, Scottish, and French descent.
I knew that motherfucker went white. He just got a tan on him, man. I'm telling you, he's not.
Maybe it's the Native American.
Oh God. Well, you know what?
We got to have him on at some point too.
Yeah. We can ask him like, hey man, what's your nationality? Because you look at him, he is darker, right? You put him against Michael Bisping, and you look at Michael Bisping, he's pale as snow, and you look at Dan Henderson, and man's got some, he's got some color to him. So I just want to go on the record. Didn't know if he was considered, Caucasian or what. I almost consider black on my team. So, but I enjoyed talking to Rich Franklin. I think what he's doing now with ONE Championship, I'm looking forward to 2025, because that has been one of the discussions on not just with ONE Championship, but now you're seeing a lot of other fighters from PFL, Bellator, who got purchased, PFL purchased Bellator. They're talking about like, hey, it'd be nice to get some fights. And, you've seen a couple of athletes come out from ONE Championship who recently signed with the UFC saying that there's no fights, but hopefully 2025 moving forward, they get more athletes, more opportunities to fight, because it is a problem in not just, mixed martial arts, but Muay Thai, kickboxing, and even boxing, right? Like I'm sure there's some athletes out there who have talked about their displace of how many fights they get the opportunity to actually fight, but that's just the name of the game. It happens all around the world. I think the biggest thing I love about Rich is how he's always remained humble, always been a class act, never been in trouble in the law. He's been very low-key, and now he's sticking on his role trying to help build ONE Championship, help other fighters get to a point where they can build their own brand. And he did have a One Warrior series. That was pretty cool. He would travel around and train with different people, trying to find new talent. And that was a feeder show into ONE Championship. But always enjoy talking to Rich Franklin. And boys, make sure you check out ONE Championship. They have a big 2025 year coming up. Some be amazing fights on the horizon. Rate Takura. They're going to Qatar. So boys, look at it. I mean, everybody's got Amazon Prime. Everybody's got Prime Video, because I know you guys live in your mom's basement, like MMA Guru, and they got Prime. So check it out. And let me know in the comments below what you guys thought about this episode of the MightyCast. I'd love to get your feedback on the infancy stage of mixed martial arts, the weight cutting, it was a wild, wild west. It truly was. There was no commission. At one point in time, it was one of the presidents, I believe, I forget the president's name, but he called it human cockfighting. And now you look where UFC is, not just UFC, but Bellator, PFL. Well, there is no Bellator, PFL, ONE Championship. It is now a global sport. So, boys, leave a comment, subscribe, hit the bell to know when we drop another banger. I am your host, Demetrious Johnson. That is my co-host, my right-hand man, Micro Wandsworth, and we will see you guys at the next episode of the MightyCast.